York right now, the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani about to give a news conference on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Of course, you've had the Trump administration barring senior Iranian government officials from actually entering the US for this event. European efforts to arrange a meeting between Donald Trump and Hassan Rouhani, they've failed. And so we have this from the Iranian president himself. He addressed the General Assembly yesterday in his official capacity. And just waiting to hear if he is about to begin speaking. He's actually being introduced, I've been told, by someone who's off camera at the moment. As I say, Hassan Rouhani speaking at the General Assembly yesterday, painting, in a way, it was a slightly contradictory speech. A lot of talk about the Middle East essentially being on fire and on a knife edge, but also painting himself as someone who can lead the Middle East through peace, talking about a coalition of hope for all the countries which use and live on the waters of the Strait of Hormuz and of the Gulf itself, and talking about freedom of movement for all involved there. Here is the Iranian President, Hassan Rouhani.
پاسخ به اونها خواهند داد. اول جناب دکتر روحانی فرمایشات اولیه‌شون رو بیان می‌فرمایند.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم.
بسیار خوشحالم. In the name of God,
امسال همه این فرصت در
I'm
پایان
very happy
سفرم به نیویورک برای من مهیا شد تا به سوالات شما اصحاب رسانه پاسخ بدم. در آغاز می‌خواستم بر این نکته تاکید کنم.
Initially, I wanted to reiterate this point that this year we had a very busy schedule, and principally the meetings and talks centered around the issue of JCPOA and the way of implementing the nuclear accord and the issue of the U.S. unilateral exit from the JCPOA and the difficulties that the implementation of the unjust and illogical policies of the United States have caused, as well as about the region and the sensitivity of the region and the need for security and peace in the region and the end of the bloody, futile war in Yemen was discussed more than other issues during this visit. And during this gathering at the General Assembly, we gave the Hormuz peace endeavor, the peace plan offered. And what we mean by that is in the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, and the Sea of Oman, the only way that exists is constructive dialogue between countries of the region, understanding between those countries, and cooperation towards security and an end to the war in Yemen, which can guarantee the security of the region.
Vis-a-vis some issues, we had successes during some of the talks. On other issues, we still must pursue different causes of these issues in our efforts.
ضمن اینکه خب با کشورهایی که مذاکره می‌کردیم به طور
some of these efforts, some of the issues that we talked about, the talks included bilateral relations between the two countries, economical issues between countries we analyzed and talked about. In my speech yesterday was in reality a framework of our policies regarding the nuclear issues as well as regional issues. We spoke quite clearly about what our policies consist of. The meetings we had with media management, as well as the foreign policy with the United States, issues of interest were discussed, which I think were quite useful. I'm ready to take your questions and provide you answers.
متشکریم جناب رئیس جمهور برای فرمایشاتتون. الان پرسش و پاسخ‌ها رو شروع می‌کنیم.
Introduce yourself and your affiliation before raising your question, and please limit yourself to one clear and short answer so we will have more time for more questions. Let's start with Pamela Falk, CBS News. The next question goes to James Bays, Al Jazeera.
Thank you. Mr. President, it's Pamela Falk from CBS News. Can Iran offer any evidence to refute the satellite imagery that shows the damage to the Saudi facilities was inflicted from the north and thus could not have been done by the Houthis, or any evidence at all to show that it did come from Yemen? And given that the U.S. said it would not lift sanctions, what does Iran see as viable first steps back to talks? Thank you.
With regards to
Yemen and the attack on the oil facilities, as we said, this is not the first, not the last. There is a bloody war in the region which is fruitless, and this is basically an aggression against the people of Yemen, and the people of Yemen has a legitimate right to defend themselves, and the world knows that the Yemen forces and the Yemen army, they have the capability, they have the long-range missiles, and many times they have attack the Saudi terrain. Those who are claiming false accusations, they should provide evidence and proof of this. If this attack has not been from the north, from the south, north, east, west, whoever is claiming this, they should provide evidence and proof for their claim and allegation. With regards to my interactions with some other world leaders who made such wrong expression, I asked them, what is your evidence? They said, we don't have such evidence, but they said that we thought that the abilities of the Yemeni armed forces were less than what's required to carry out such an attack. I told them in response that your lack of updated information on the ground about the Yemeni capability lead you to such conclusion, but if you don't have any evidence or documentation, please do that to make available that to me, because I'm quite keen in seeing that. So instead of putting accusations and allegations, let us think about how to put this fire of war in the region. I approached America, France, United Kingdom, and Germany. Those are the countries who are constantly supplying to the United Arab Emirates to kill the Yemenis. In the supply of such weapons, there should be pressure on them. The people of Yemen a few days ago announced that they are ready for a complete ceasefire, and they had ceased all of their activities on a condition that the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates should also cease theirs. But unfortunately, after this announcement from the Yemenis, we have witnessed an ongoing attacks from those two countries.
Next, James Bays, Al Jazeera English, and next question goes to Maria Kerenova, Itartas.
James Bays, Al Jazeera English. Mr. President, while you've been here in the US, how closely are you following political developments here? And is Iran's best hope now President Trump either being impeached or being defeated in next year's election?
Our best hope is for the United States government to pursue the right policies, whomever that person may be, from which branch or which party, Mr. Trump or any other individual. If the right policies are chosen, it will benefit the people of America and the region and the world, and it will benefit everyone equally. If America wishes today to talk and after 2 years reach a conclusion, an agreement, and then sign an agreement after a few months to change its mind and say, well, there wasn't such an agreement, I'm seeking something else now. In Persian, we say this is just making excuses. That any day when they are faced with problems, they make other parties responsible for that. We were partners in talks. We conducted talks and negotiations for 2 whole years and reached an agreement. In addition to that, the UN Security Council enshrined that agreement. Therefore, the resolution 2231. So this will not benefit anyone. For such an agreement, that America violating it in reality in the UN Security Council resolution, of course, vis-a-vis the American material, that what that transpires, but that does not matter for us. It's an internal matter, which is the purview and the prerogative of the United States. The U.S. Congress, the American people, they should decide whatever conclusion they reach to. But it doesn't matter for us. But what is at most for us is that the United States should restore the trust that it has damaged to the world. In other words, I will remain committed to my agreement vis-a-vis the accord to UNESCO, that if there were UN resolutions vis-a-vis the Palestinian issues, I will not trample upon them. If I had made an agreement with that country and 6 other nations, I will live up to those commitments. That's what's important.
So, Maria Krenova, Russian TASS news agency. The question is about visa issues. President Trump announced yesterday a decision to deny entrance to United States to all high-rank Iranian and Venezuelan officials. Russia also had big problems with entrance to U.S. More than 10 Russian delegates couldn't come to a General Assembly. So how far it can go? Should the United Nations headquarters be moved from New York already? And will Iran do anything to answer to these measures? Thank you.
Well, we have had problem. We have been faced with this problem from before. The Iranians who sought to enter the United States faced problems, and even recently, during a scientific competition an academic scientific competition centering on airspace. A team of our students from university in our country were set to participate in this competition in the United States. They were not granted visas to enter into the country and participate. Not even, in fact, they won via video conferencing. But a government that reaches this point to make a fight against science, to pick a fight against healthcare, to pick a fight against those who are ill and who are seeking treatment and those who wish to see their loved ones. To me, this actually shows that the wrong policies of this government. So the Iranians don't have any love affair to come to the United States. We come here. It does not mean that we aim to come here and with no purpose. Of course, I'm not saying this. That with the nation of the people, we have a good relationship. The reason we have come here because the United Nations is here, and the United States does not have the right to impede the coming and goings of two officials from the United Nations, because the United Nations serves as the home of all governments and all nations throughout the world. This is the house of peace and the house of communications with one another, and America must not misuse this or take advantage of its position, of her position as a host, and only grant visas to those who America likes. Yes, if someone wishes to travel to America, that's their prerogative. As a tourist or something else, that's their prerogative to grant visa or not, but to come to the United Nations, and particularly Muslim countries, third world countries particularly, even neighboring countries such as Mexico, and they're facing problems as far as being able to enter into the United States is concerned. And I think this has but as far as the moving of the United Nations headquarters is concerned, it's an important decision. If we are asked, we will obviously vote for it, for the United Nations headquarters to be transferred to a more secure and better country, which does not have a narrow view points that we have been witnessing.
Franco Ciardo, TRT.
Greetings, Mr. President. Thus far, for a few times, you have spoken of the conditions for talks with America, for America to do away with the sanctions, return to the JCPOA, and then start talks. As someone who has the years and years-long experience of such talks, how much do you see this as being feasible and realistic and possible? What we announce in our policies, if you want to put percentages on the possibility of that occurring, at any time a country can feel that her previous policies were wrong and return to the correct path. So what we say is for America to take the preconditions of the table. The preconditions of America is if it wishes to talk to Iran, the condition is that the sanctions and a maximum pressure upon the Iranian people must be implemented and then entering into talks. We think this is the wrong precondition. This must be taken off and lifted from the table. The sanctions must be lifted. Cease this policy of exerting maximum pressure and pursue a policy of dialogue and logic and reason, is to seek that which benefits the world and America. If we reach a time when these preconditions are taken off the table, of course the possibility exists to talk with America.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Sierra from TRT World. Thank you for having this press conference every year for us. We appreciate that. Question, do you still have any confidence in the existing members of the JCPOA to financially support the deal? What's left of it?
Following the unilateral exit of America from JCPOA, the remaining parties, which are the 4+1, held meetings at different levels and promised us that they would be able to make up for the exit of the United States from the deal, and for the JCPOA to continue. We were not happy to see the JCPOA or nuclear agreement damaged, and we did whatever we could in our power to preserve it. So we did listen to their plans and proposals. We set for many plans. Initially, actually, they told us that we would go through central banks in order to conduct business with Iran. After a few months, they said we have run into problems with our central banks, so we will go through another financial system, SPV, if you will. SPV will conduct business. But after a few months, they said that this system is running into challenge as well, and now we will go through another system, which is quite in-text. Thus far, the last one, even in practice, have not been able to stand on its feet. So unfortunately, when it comes to actions, Europe has demonstrated its inability or lack of willingness, or perhaps it wishes not to pay anything for the agreement that it is a part of. So they say that they wish to stay in this agreement, but they want to put all the burden on the shoulders of Iran. So we have kept trying. We are still talking to them. Our distinguished foreign minister during the last few days that he's been in New York City has had meetings with a 4+1 representative, and perhaps other talks will continue, but thus far, unfortunately, they have not succeeded. 4 months ago, we announced to them that if you are not able to adhere to your commitments, we will also gradually decrease our commitment in 2 steps, in 2 stages. We will decrease our commitment, and the 3rd step, which began, we hope that before we have reached in the end of the 60 days, we thought we will be able to reach an agreement. However, if they cannot adhere to their commitment, of course, we will take further measures or steps.
Mr. Mohsen Taherzadeh, IRNA.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Edith Lederer of the Associated Press. We know that President Macron of France was trying to arrange a meeting between you and President Trump. Were there any contacts at all between your delegation and the American delegation? And there are some reports that President Trump may still want to meet you, not in New York necessarily, but somewhere else in the coming months. Is that a possibility even if sanctions aren't lifted?
Well, of course, the President of France has been seeking for months to find a solution for this problem. we were carrying forward two solutions, the European solution and the American solution. The European solution, in that framework, we reached a certain agreement, which were in the implementation stage, when they said, well, in some form, to implement and make actionable the European solution, we need the American approval. So this is their problem, which has nothing or little to do with us. Of course, Mr. Macron has always been pursuing this line as well, that the better solution would be to resolve the problem between Iran and America. And we have said it, and I've said it during, saying it during this press conference as well, that America should lift their precondition. Then, of course, there a new ground will be laid for a new condition, which can be considered, of course, during the meetings we have had in the last few days in New York City. We have talked about different positions. We have had different discussions, and I don't want to say that such plans will never be realized. But thus far, during this visit, we have not reached a point of confirmation, and of course there are other points above that and beyond France, and those are thought about as well. Regards, Mr. President, this is Taherzada. In your opinion, if Mr. Trump is seeking a new agreement, why does he not go away with sanction and take it off the table, so open a path for negotiations? And after returning to Iran, are you able to say that you did your utmost to take away the sanctions? I believe that what America was seeking from day one of the sanctions and its exit from the JCPOA, want to tell the people of Iran that they wanted to tell that the Iranian government or Iranian administration has problem, and they're unable to forward their affairs properly. But the formula implemented by Trump was not a good response to those needs. I didn't say that I'm leaving because Iran has had problems implementing or living to her commitments. He just said from the very beginning that slogans in their campaigns during his campaign season that he was against this agreement. Usually such slogans are heard during election campaigns. Once the campaign comes to an end, these slogans are dropped and reality is realized. But he chose a way of going about this that naturally it demonstrated that America would be condemned for these policies, because they were forced to admit time and time again that Iran has been living up to her commitments. According to IAEA report, he said that he did not like this agreement. An agreement reached by governments is not a food item which is subject to change on daily basis. You say you like it or you don't like it. An agreement, a multilateral agreement between 7 governments, many nations, it is enshrined in the UN Security Council resolution. So the objective of the United States was to exert pressure through this sanction and separate them and create gap between the people and the establishment. It was from the very onset they did not succeed. What he did accomplish was to create a distance and widen a distance that already existed between the people of Iran and America. This is the greatest distance so far between the nation of Iran and America. It was very clear that the path chosen by them would not succeed. So despite these pressures and wrong choices, They never said they wish to speak to Iran. We don't have any problem with the negotiation, but we are not willing with exerting the pressures and sanctions. They have left exerting the pressures and sanctions off the table. And then we can talk. And first, they have to create trust that this government is able to talk and reach a conclusion. And obviously, it will be in a different set of in a different environment.
Dandalus, NBC News. To diffuse tensions and to build confidence between the two governments, would the Supreme Leader support and endorse the idea of discussions about resolving the fate of Americans held in Iran and Iranian nationals detained in the United States?
Well, you know, you're aware that on different occasions in the past, we have talks with American officials aimed at freeing prisoners in both countries. At time we did succeed, meaning that the Americans were freed, if you recall. And on the other side, the Iranians held here. Mr. Trump's administration, we started these talks with Mr. Trump's administration. But once the Americans announced that if one individual in Iran is freed, they will take that in as a good gesture. And it did happen in Iran, in that their citizen was freed, was released. And instead of the American fulfilling their promise and to reciprocate, they only thanked Iran and made an expression. So we've always been ready to do this. We will always be ready to do this. But the ball today stands in America's fort.
Valeria Roboco, answer.
Hi, this is Moyako from TBS. Thank you very much for having us at the press conference and answering questions. As a Japanese media, I have a question in regards to a bilateral meeting with Japan, Prime Minister Abe. I understand that you had very traditional and cordial meeting with Prime Minister Abe, and I would like to ask you if there's any way for Japan to play a role to contribute fixing the relationship between United States and Iran. What is your thought of it?
Our relations with the Japanese government and have been very friendly relations. And with Mr. Prime Minister Abe, I've had many meetings during the past few years and different times. We've had bilateral meetings, and I've spoken of bilateral and international issues. Recently, a few months ago, you may recall that he had a visit to Tehran, which was a very good visit, very fruitful and useful visit. In New York, yes, we did have a friendly encounter during which we spoke on different topics. Yes, Prime Minister Abe has been seeking this particular part from a few months ago in particular, aimed at taking away the sanctions implemented by the America and in a way to bring ties together and change the atmosphere. Mr. Abe is still seeking to pursue that pathway. Perhaps to that degree, M&A, we do hope that these pathways will yield to tangible results. If America reaches the conclusion that the actions taken 18 months ago has been 100% to the detriment of the nation, of the people of Iran, and all of the countries in the region, and all of that, job creators and industries who are engaged with business in Iran. So the right choice must be made.
Valeria Roboco, answer. The next, Richard Ross, CNN.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, did you have any contact with the new Italian government, and did you count still on the traditional friendship between our two countries? Thank you.
Yes, with new government, Italian government, of course not during this visit, but during the last UNGA visit in New York, we had a meeting. Our relation is friendly, even it was friendly with the previous one, during the auspices of which I traveled to Italy, and their Prime Minister traveled to Iran. Their relations are friendly, and because of the American sanctions in some issues, our economic relation has decreased. But the commercial relations and ties between the two countries, as well as other relations, other arenas like social, cultural, have continued to exist. And Italy has always been one of the countries in Europe that had the greatest volume, the second highest volume of trade with Iran. And we see Italy as a friend. And of course, and even today, regarding some regional issues, regarding Yemen, Italians are also present in these talks which we had with other European countries.
Will be David Weiner, Bloomberg.
Richard Roth, CNN. Welcome back, Mr. President. There's a report today from overseas that the IAEA says that there's a breach of the JCPOA, that Iran has been starting advanced models of centrifuges to enrich uranium. This is at Natanz, and you're accumulating or have been prepared to accumulate enriched uranium. And 5 years ago, you left for the airport. You got a call from President Obama. Do you expect to get a phone call on the way to the airport today or tomorrow?
The last part, my answer to that is negative. But vis-à-vis the first part of your question, we have announced that since the third step, the decrease of JCPOA commitment, was that the limitations that we had vis-à-vis development within the framework of JCPOA, we have taken those limitations off the table. But I want to share a very important point with you. The supervision in the inspection of the IAEA has increased or decreased. The IAEA, in the same fashion that since the beginning of the JCPOA in 2015, were supervising and inspecting and were carrying out its activities in Iran. They are still carrying out their activities in the same manner. There has been no decrease. Some of the commitment in the JCPOA has decreased in one of, and now there is no talk on increasing the enrichment level. That's not the scope of what we are doing. Our scope is research and development. in advanced centrifuges that were supposed a few years from now. That schedule might have been moved up. So once this chain is completed, of course, it will be made active. And this is again only, or the only purview of this is for research development, no other objective. You're quite right. But the important point is that we have announced this ahead of time transparently.
During the recent G7 meeting, President Trump said that he'd be supportive of a credit guarantee, which President Macron was working on. It later surfaced the offer was for $15 billion. Is that still on the table? And why is that being held up, in your opinion? What were the financial options that were discussed this week? Is there a new instrument that is being discussed, or is it still for the $15 billion? Thank you.
Of course, during our recent conversations, we have been talking about taking away the sanctions in their entirety. What we have spoke of and discussed in New York, you know that the credit line discussion was a temporary one for a length of time of 3 months to 4 months at the most, after which it would continue in a different fashion. In our opinion, what the Europeans have problem in implementing that, and they know the reasons. In New York, we talked beyond that. We talked about the region, and the important regional issues were discussed. And this discussion did not reach or did not come to full conclusion.
CGTN. Next question, David Sanger, New York Times.
Mr. President, I'm Li Ling Tan from Feature Story News and China Global TV Network. China's State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for all efforts to resolve the nuclear issue. Given the U.S. pressure and new sanctions on Chinese firms for transporting oil from Iran, and the lack of success by the Europeans in their efforts to try and soften the economic blow on Iran, how much of a role is China playing, and what more would you like to see from Beijing?
China has been a friend and is an active member of the JCPOA negotiations and a signatory. After the signing of the JCPOA, we have had good relations, and perhaps we have seen a decrease in our relations due to the sanctions. But the Americans are still seeking their previous policies. They are still moving forward to those policies. In other words, more pressure aiming at reaching discussions, which is the same way. Which is taking them further and further away from the discussions. So this is the mistake that they have made, and they keep repeating this mistake, unfortunately. As you said, every day, perhaps on a daily basis, America targets and brings under sanction an entity because of their relationship with Iran. And they have wrong policy of sanctions. It will not have any benefits. So we hope that our relationship with China will be expanded in the future.
Mr. President, David Sanger from the Times, good to see you. You talked before about the maximum pressure that the United States is placing on Iran. would you say that the strategic purpose of your escalation of nuclear activity at Natanz is your own form of maximum pressure? And if not, what is its strategic purpose? You've said many times you don't want to build nuclear weapons. So what is the purpose of continuing to increase the production at Natanz? And do you see an end to that? Is there an end point beyond which you would not go, beyond 20%, for example?
What we have announced, and even previously, our commitments within the JCPOA are bilateral, multilateral. Some of those commitments we have to fulfill, other commitments our counterparts have to fulfill. What we have witnessed in the last few months have become a unilateral set of commitments that had to be implemented. In other words, we were living up to our commitments fully, and they kept decreasing their commitments. We wanted to create a balance. Just as they were decreasing their commitment, we wish to decrease ours as well. And this is a formula that had been envisaged in paragraph 26 and 36 of the JCPOA, that if one side does not live up to and fulfill part of their commitment, the other side can, to the same degree, decrease its commitment. So what we do is a decrease of commitment within the JCPOA. Therefore, we announce that the decrease of our commitment is in such a fashion that's reversible. In other words, this very hour that we are talking to each other here, if the 4+1 announce that we will fulfill all of our commitments, immediately we will also return to our commitments to all of it within the JCPOA. And the temporary actions that we are taking will be reversed to the previous status. So we are not seeking nuclear weapons. Our nuclear activities are completely under the purview of IAEA. We are not after maximum pressure, medium pressure, or no pressure. We seek proper implementation of the JCPOA. So if we do not lessen our commitment as envisaged in Article 26 and 36 of the JCPOA, then that means that we are not fully implementing the JCPOA. We are using the tools brought into the JCPOA to live up to our commitment, and therefore we hope that everyone comes to full implementation.
Hassan Rouhani, the Iranian president, speaking in New York, a lengthy news conference on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. It seemed a strong opportunity for him to take questions from the media, primarily in English as well. The media who have assembled in New York for the General Assembly, chance to get their questions across to the president. Let's start with Zain Basravi, though, who is our correspondent in Tehran, listening along to that. What did you take from it, Zain? I mean, there was a lot covered there, but it seemed to be plenty on the JCPOA, as they say, the Iran deal, and Hassan Rouhani digging in and saying, hey, if you want to talk, America, that's fine, but lift the sanctions.
That's exactly right. We have to say President Hassan Rouhani looking much more relaxed than he did last year. His body language was relaxed. He seems confident. This is really sort of a last hurrah before he leaves New York to return to Tehran. He wants to go out on a high note. Now, at the end of the day, every policy issue related to Iran is indeed in some way related to the 2015 nuclear deal, to the collapse or the collapsing of the still teetering along Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the 2015 nuclear deal. But the first question right out of the gate when he started taking questions was about whether or not Iran had any proof that it was not behind the attack on Saudi oil facilities that were claimed by Yemen's Houthi fighters earlier this month. And to that he said that if anybody is going to blame Iran, really those who are laying those allegations at Iran's feet should be the ones providing evidence that Iran carried it out. not the other way around. So he turned that question upside down right away, and he said unequivocally that Iran did have nothing to do with it. And in fact, world leaders that he spoke to at this UN General Assembly and said to them, what is the evidence that you're basing this allegation on? And they said, according to him, they have no evidence. They just didn't think that the Yemen's Houthi fighters had such capability. And to that, he said he told world leaders that they had outdated information about the ground reality inside Yemen. He also reminded them that this is a Saudi-led war, that this is a Saudi invasion, and that that should really be the focus of world leaders. He also talked about trying to put out fires instead of fueling weapons sales that he laid at the feet of the United States and European countries who continue to supply weapons to Saudi Arabia, thus fueling the war as opposed to trying to put out the fire. And he also had a few questions about sort of how he felt about the current state of play with regards to the Trump administration, the politics going on inside the country, and he smiled, not really taking that opportunity to kick U.S. President Donald Trump while he was down. He said it was up to the American people to decide who their leaders were, but he said the American leaders, what they should do is honor their commitments. And what he meant by that is that the United States pulling out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a UN-backed plan, was effectively a violation of international agreement. He went on to address a question about whether or not the UN headquarters should be relocated because the United States wasn't granting visas for certain officials. He said the United States shouldn't play politics when it comes to UN-related visits by world leaders. And he also was asked if talks were possible between the United States and Iran. He said talks are always possible. It's always possible to come to a kind of agreement and to sit down, and he was for dialogue. A very, very different message from the early days a few years ago of when the United States pulled out of the deal. Iran was much more defensive about carrying out any talks with the United States, a much warmer approach to this, but he said it would not happen in a climate of intimidation. When asked about whether or not he was willing to meet Donald Trump, he really sidestepped that question, but he did address it subtly in his UN General Assembly speech a day earlier, saying that photo ops and memories that are taken with pictures don't happen at the start of negotiations. That is the culmination of negotiations. A slight dig at the U.S. President Donald Trump, who is known for enjoying photo ops, perhaps a reference to his meeting with the North Korean leader.
Zain Basravi summing up what we've heard from the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani in New York. Thank you, Zain.